When you look at innovation, it's really hard to look at the entire organization, especially one at, 10,000, 12,000 people. It's really hard to look at it as one organization.
Hello, everyone. I'm your co-host, Erin, and along with Nandan Thakar, we're excited to welcome you to the SureWorks podcast, where we explore the complexities of building, operating, and optimizing infrastructure assets in the built world.
All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SureWorks podcast. We're really excited to introduce Josh DeStefano with DPR today. So we're really excited to have Josh with us and share some of his thought leadership about innovation and AEC. So I'll turn it over to Josh to go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself, your origin story, if you will, and how you got into the industry.
Hey, Erin, thanks for having me on, and hi, Nandan. It's great to meet both of you. So I've been in the industry for a long time. I've had different roles, been in the industry since 2001, back when I was doing some civil engineering work, basically just connecting the dots in CAD kind of stuff. But I've been working for general contractors for a really long time. I worked for Lend-Lease, worked for W.M. Klarman, worked for Swinnerton. But in 2012, I joined DPR. And I've had sort of different focuses over the years. I spent about 5 or 6 years in operations as a PE, and I got some really good exposure to different projects, different types of projects, but also lots of phases of construction, everything from permitting to closeout and commissioning. So that really set me up for the sort of the digitization wave that kind of began, for me sometime in 2007. And that's when I started shifting over to focusing on BIM, virtual design and construction. And then eventually that included like reality capture and, 360 photos and things like that.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time in that arena, probably about 14, 15 years in BDC and, leading teams and understanding how we were going to really get business value out of that, and then how do we scale it. So I was involved in developing strategies and running teams and did a lot of coordination and reality capture work myself. And then a couple years ago, I was invited to join DPR's innovation team. So we have a corporate innovation team that focuses on our innovation strategy, our processes, and sort of helps inform some of our venture capital side, which is our W&D Ventures. And it's really great because I get to take all that experience from, being out on job sites and learning how to, build stuff and get things done, to now, and being somebody who liked to disrupt the status quo a lot of times, try new things. That's something that I always kind of added to my role in VDC, was like, oh, let's try that out, or this is a new thing. Reality capture was that for us, obviously, at one point. So now I get to focus on how we do that and how we enabled others to do that. Talk about our culture, which is a big point for us, and try to push that culture of innovation. And I've gotten involved in a couple other industry associations and things like that, like the USIBD, where they've developed a level of accuracy standard. Now working with the Reality Capture Network to develop an association there and really just pull people together to try to solve some of those specific industry problems that we have around reality capture. So, doing quite a few things.
Yeah, quite a few. It sounds like your cup is full with a lot of exciting initiatives. So, great to hear. I'm curious, you mentioned being a disruptor. I think a lot of us in the industry who are on the tech and innovation side, we probably would label ourselves that as well. Tell me a little bit more about that disruptor mindset, and especially coming from the field and VDC and kind of channeling that to, all the projects that you've got your hand in today.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had the perfect sort of recipe of, a mindset that we really should take a look at new stuff if it's got, promise to, improve our productivity or, give us, additional value that wasn't there before. A good example is for me is reality capture. It was something that was fairly new to the scene when I first, got my first demo in 2010 or whenever that was. But eventually understanding that is the other side to the BIM coin, right? We've always, I didn't talk about it this way before, but I realized that, we're putting a plan together. That model is the plan. And with reality capture, you've got that other side, that actual. And so when I saw, things coming up and emerging like 360 cameras and, different things like that, where we could make, the way the drone deploy talks about it these days, they talk about giving superpowers. And I think that's a perfect way to look at it, because now you've got the ability to sort of move through time. And so it's really just a combination of having that mindset that I'm not really going to accept these challenges anymore. A lot of people are willing to live with problems just because they know how to work through them. And that's sort of, in my opinion, what's led us to this sort of savior mentality that I'm the guy that can solve this problem. And I kind of go, why do we have that problem in the first place?
Right.
So, a combination of that mindset, but also leaders that were like, let's go, let's try new things. Let's break stuff. Let's fail fast and learn. And that's kind of how we look at it. It's like, there's no failure in innovation. It's really just learning or getting the exact value that you expected, kind of thing.
Yeah, that reminds me of just some general conversations I've had over the years with all sorts of different perspectives and roles in the industry. And one of the things that comes up time and time again is we're an industry of problem solvers. So a lot of times, we tend to rely on that strength. I can solve any problem. I can get through any challenge. I don't necessarily have to change anything up. I know I can solve it somehow, some way. So we see a lot of times these teams taking on unnecessary burdens and having superhero syndrome. Oh, I can fix that somehow. Or, we can just work really hard and get through this challenge. But we never really tend to stop to slow down a little bit and just think a little bit more critically to say, okay, well, if we just make a change here or there, maybe apply a new tool, maybe this doesn't even become a problem ever again for us. So yeah.
There's a good sports analogy with golf. I used to play a lot more golf. I have 3 kids now, so I don't play a whole lot of golf these days. But there's this concept that if you have a slice, and a lot of people, don't hit the ball straight, it's very hard to do. But you'll find, some people are consistent with hitting the ball in a certain direction. And there's this point where if you play that slice, you have to have it to play it. And if you play it, you got to have it. Meaning, if you hit the ball straight all of a sudden, it's going to be off in the wrong direction. And it's sort of like living with this problem instead of dealing with it, sort of fixing the swing and always, trying to hit the ball straight. Instead, we go, okay, well, we have this problem, so we're just going to adjust and deal with it. And I think it's kind of the same thing. It's sort of like, well, we want better tools, but we don't want to take the time to pause and sort of, check them out. And, it's really interesting. I've been to DPR for over 12 years now, and I've watched the company grow a lot and want to be more consistent. And, that's sort of the yin and yang of innovation versus consistency, because we have these conversations around, well, what about our best practices? And I said, well, if our best practices are going to get better in a couple of years, we need to be innovating on this now. And that's a whole different topic of speed of innovation and sort of, tech adoption speed. But it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. Josh, just to extend that in sort of more practical terms, more so at DPR, so that others can learn from it. How do you guys identify? Because construction is an industry of industries, right? So there's a lot of problems to solve and a lot of coordination and alignment to be had. Different the head contractor and subcontractors and the asset owner. What is your process at DPR to identify areas of innovation? Like, what do you guys focus on, and how does those those challenges filter through from the field to, you mentioned an example of reality capture. But like that, what's the funnel that brings that target list so that you and the team go about looking for innovative solutions?
Yeah, I wish I had the magic bullet for that, but it's pretty complicated. But at the same time, it really starts with our company strategies, right? So we like to call ourselves a self-performing, general contractor. It's part of our identity. So, we're looking at things that are specific to our crafts and, our field workers. And so it has a lot to do with looking at the core business and starting with the strategies and sort of figuring out, all right, what do we want to do and how do we want to do business? We also look at our challenges, and try to understand how different, we don't call them departments, we call them work groups, but how different work groups, what challenges are they facing? Because really, when you look at innovation, it's really hard to look at the entire organization, especially one at 10,000, 12,000 people. It's really hard to look at it as one organization. We really have to start breaking that down and looking at, okay, well, we do have these goals and challenges, from an entire enterprise perspective, but just like you said, it's a bunch of different industries and it's a bunch of different businesses sort of lumped into one. And so even, a work group or a department, you kind of have to look at what are their specific challenges. Just like you said, the frontline, workers, like we need to listen to them. And so as an innovation team, we do a couple things. One, we spend time with people, out at job sites and introduce them to technology and also see what their pain points are. But we also try to align with specific work group leaders and business leaders on what are their specific challenges. So instead of us trying to all boil the ocean, we have a team. There's about 9 of us, and several of us focus on specific areas. So my background in virtual design and construction, reality capture, and some of the technologies that are adjacent to all that, sort of point me in the direction of things that have to do with those technologies, right? So if we're trying to improve our VDC workflows, or I happen to know that we've got particular challenges here or there with VDC, I have extensive knowledge of that strategy. I have relationships with the leadership team, and so that's a way to sort of leverage that and figure out, okay, well, here's some solutions that we should be testing out now, kicking the tires on now to influence that behavior later. And so it has a lot to do with that. It has a lot to do with, trying to align with those folks and understand what are their specific pain points while also balancing the new stuff that you're still trying to figure out where that's fitting in.
Yeah, great. I'll share 2 observations. So all this resonates with me almost 100% because for about 4 or 5 years, I was a CIO for a construction company similar to DPR, based out of Houston. Obviously, I ran Australia for them. And that company is about 40,000 plus people and big, while you have business groups, we had operating units, they still do. I think, is this for a committee of experts like yourselves who drive things at a global level and then find proof of concept candidates within the operating units? And then, if you have success, then it can spread over other units. In absence of that, you have either operational leads or CIOs driving the solution, and then they take a bend towards one vendor or another. So it's quite, there's one thing around having a good understanding of problem statement and then matching it to solution. And then the second thing, especially in 5,000-10,000 plus people companies and growing, of how to make that consistent across different business groups, right? So that you don't have pocket of excellence that, that value generation is shared across the board. So that was one. The second one, and in true Japanese style, I've talked to a number of Japanese construction companies, and they go to the nth degree to do workshops with all their field ops teams, post-it notes, filter through ideas, almost Kaizen, Six Sigma, and then filter down to what the problem statement is. But I understand what you're saying, that, if you have a number of SMEs who have deep experience within that domain, and if they interact with each other in a systematic way, that could really accelerate the identification of what a company should focus on. So, no, great. Thanks for that. Anything you want to explore further, Erin?
Yeah, just taking in a lot of it. I've been writing down a couple notes here, and I think what comes back to me from what each of you are sharing is just we're all trying to get to a more predictable outcome in construction, and predictability is driven a lot by how well we can manage our information on our projects, as well as the information from our people. So, we're in this, I would say, new age of AI, right? I can't get away without bringing up the topic of AI these days, but it all drills back down to our data. So it's just bringing up those themes of like, how are we going to manage, all this information, whether it's problem statements that we're drilling down to through sticky notes from conversations with our field teams, all the way back to, sifting through a large data set of feedback, or something that's in our IT system somewhere, and communicating that back to our leadership teams, and then aligning the whole thing so that it ultimately results in more predictable, safer projects. I kind of come back to that data component of it all.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I think that there's a couple interesting things about it, and one is I think you're alluding to the use case and the need, which is, there's I keep hearing that, AI is good at things that we aren't. In other words, people aren't good at. And I think that one of the things that's plaguing us is the amount of information that's there.
Absolutely.
Projects have gotten really, really big, and in some cases, and a lot of those clients want to move really, really fast. And so that means you've got to be exchanging a lot of information. Like, information on a project is currency. And that's one thing that I'm really excited about, is I think that AI can help us sift through, find, information a lot faster and sort of summarize it for folks. I've done some on the side, personal experimentation with GPT. I'm on a local board for the Little League, and I've decided, I'd try this little, test case to be able to, talk to it intelligently, especially internally when we're talking about, like, well, what are we going to use that for? And it's like, well, here's an example, right? I put the Constitution in there, and I can reference it, and I can, provide others on this team, reference to a document that reads kind of like a contract, and they can find, information in there about, how we're supposed to run this organization. And so I think it's stuff like that will help us, find information, sift through it, and be able to sort of summarize it and take action on it. So I'm really excited about that. But what's interesting is I think that AI has resurfaced sort of this, like, oh, tech moves so fast. And, my sort of message recently is not really. It's sort of like, if you
Tell
really...
us more.
I think it's moving very quickly. And, if you follow how, hardware is developing and all this stuff, it's getting a lot better. But I don't feel like it's as surprisingly fast as a lot of folks, claim it is. And the reason that I say that is because AI is a great example. We're talking about it again. But, there's this term AI winter that I learned about very recently, diving into this stuff. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And, well, that means a lull in AI development and investing. And it's been around for decades, apparently, because we've had this hype curve of talking about AI. It's going to be the next big thing, and then it dies down, and then it happens again, and it dies down. And so we're on like the third or fourth sort of discussion, if you will, as
Yep.
as people, being hyped up about AI.
Bit of a roller coaster.
And we've had different breakthroughs, in computer vision and machine learning and all this kind of stuff. And it's great. Like we're getting to a point where there's things that weren't possible with machine learning and, basic computer vision that would take a really long time to compute. And now we can do those things with the large language models and all of this stuff that we're hearing about today. So there's breakthroughs, but it's not like AI was invented by ChatGPT or, OpenAI, right? So that's where I kind of go, and a great example, we talked about reality capture, like laser scanners, things like that. Those have been around for a really long time. They were developed for, different purposes, and some of it went to, measuring weather and all kinds of crazy stuff. But, again, these are technologies that have taken a long time to mature. And so, I find it really interesting. I sort of talk about, there's, as an innovator, part of my job is to look as far down the horizon as I can and even extrapolate and anticipate what could happen beyond that. And so, it's not surprising that I would have that take, but I sort of, the call to action there is sort of like, hey, put your head up every once in a while and check out what's going on. I don't think it's moving as fast as you think it is. And we'll be better prepared if people are sort of, anticipating things coming up. Because I think a lot of the stuff can help us a lot.
That's 100%. A very interesting perspective, because generally you get feedback that everything's changing way too fast, and you being in that innovation panel and you saying it's just moving at a considered pace, I suppose. And I think when you mention that this is the latest incarnation of AI, I suppose, other technologies have gone through that, right? Like, your first iPhone was a revelation, but then there's 10 years preceding that with PDAs and pages and what have you.
Exactly.
That led to that device, but it was the App Store that clicked. Same with blockchains, right? Like, someone cracked cryptography and then this, that, and the other, and then combination of those dozen things with a, immaculate conception in Bitcoin is what it is. So, yeah, no, you're right. And I think the other thing that it just occurred to me that while your role is looking for innovation, you want to be catching innovation at a point where, it's gone through the Gartner hype curve, where you're not excited when it's just the point. Then there's that, what is it? The
trough of disillusionment.
Trough of disillusion, and then the plateau of productivity, if I remember it correctly. And you want to be catching it at the start of plateau of productivity, because if you catch an innovation too early and it hasn't proven itself, it's not going to be repeatable across your projects and business groups, right? So
no, that's a very, very good observation. I think of it also in terms of crossing the chasm. I feel like our group is sort of like innovators that came from the innovative side and the sort of visionary side, and we're sort of like trying to bridge the gap and sort of say like, okay, we've tested this over here, and we don't have a lot of data on it, but we think the technology is good enough. So, and that's sort of speaking to the hype curve, like you mentioned, and that's kind of where some of my focus has been lately is really just understanding that the way that I might present something as an innovation leader, as an innovator, I really need to get others sort of bought in on something, because what I've really noticed is that as we build that momentum, when I get other groups talking to within themselves about why something is valuable, it takes on a different tone, I think. It sort of like validates it on a different level. So that's one of the things that I've noticed is I kind of have to know my lane as an innovator and as somebody who's trying to bridge that gap and find those people that are pragmatic but also interested, and then they're the ones that sort of latch onto them, and that's when you sort of create this, a little bit more momentum.
Yeah, great.
Those disruptors that are still on the field side, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you ever miss being back in the field all the time, or?
I mean, I do sometimes. There's certain things about, focusing on, one specific project or, really, I'll tell you what I miss is I miss the ebb and flow of projects. Since I've been disconnected from being a project resource for a number of years, it has been a while, but, there was sort of a ramp up, get to, a productivity zone, and you're sort of like, you're working your tail off, but you've got a few different, goals. You got this project that, eventually you're going to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then you're going to take a break, and then you'll do it again, kind of thing. With this type of role, you don't get that. You don't get that sort of ebb and flow. There's always something new to take a look at, and I think that
it's a constant fire hose a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's what maybe makes it feel like things are happening so fast. Is that a lot of the you get a breadth of particular solutions in a space now, and so while it's like, okay, well, this has been around a while, but all of a sudden there's a dozen companies. And so from the outside looking in, I totally understand that perspective that, well, what do you mean there's not two to choose from and to flip a coin thing? It's like, no, you got to do a choose by advantage and, really dive into the features and what do you want? And is this going to solve your problem kind of thing? So it has become more complicated for sure.
100%. I think there's some really interesting stats out there about just the quantity of startups in AEC, and it's skyrocketed from, just a handful, maybe 10, from like, I don't know, a few years ago to like thousands, like literal thousands and thousands of these solutions. So it's simultaneously like one of the most exciting times, but also pretty overwhelming to be in the industry. But overall, I think it's mostly exciting. It's my take. I'm a little biased because I like
agree.
The tech, but yeah.
I agree. I love learning about new stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a level of, creative destruction too, right? So there's no harm in dozens of companies trying and then sort of cream floating at the top. And that's just the process of innovation, right? Like, if innovation was that clear cut, then, the tier one companies of 70s and 80s would have cracked the digital age, but it passed them by because it takes the risk takers and innovators to push the battle, and they find commercial success or not is secondary, but ultimately it improves the industry in some way. So what I wanted to ask you was, with your broad observation of the landscape of what you're trying to solve, what do you find as an area or a couple of areas that are really under-addressed today, Josh, that you think more needs to happen in that field, which is like an obvious target?
That's a good question.
Do you have any?
Curious too.
That is a really good one. This
is almost like a voice of the customer, right? Like me being a vendor.
Yeah.
I've been where you are, so I bring that vision and that problem statement with me. But then I've been building the software and deploying and scaling for 5 years, and again, I'm not on the field now, but I talk to customers, and what do you find as being under-addressed today?
That's a really good one. Under-addressed is sort of the trick here, because I feel like there's a lot of things that are sort of getting addressed, but I feel like we could probably do more when it comes to safety. There was a concept that I learned and worked with a friend of mine who worked at a utility company, and they were trying to safe off some roofs that had a photovoltaics on it. And we talked in length. He was a safety expert, and we talked about this concept of pre-engineering or engineering out challenges. And I think that we could do a lot more of that, where we could think about how buildings are actually going to be built and build in safety mechanisms like tie hooks and different things like that for for workers out in the field, into the structure, into things like that, and not make them an afterthought. We experimented with an idea a few years ago where we would actually plan out the temporary lighting based on the OSHA standards in the model beforehand. And so we worked with a vendor that had some dynamic lighting sort of families. And we were like, okay, well, let's adjust this to meet all the stats and specs of the temporary lighting, and then we'll plan this out and see how it, do some analysis on it. And so I think there's several things like that we're probably, not doing a whole lot on. I think that AI has a lot of potential for helping people, like we said, like go through information and gather insights and things like that. But it can be folks can be very hesitant. So we have, several clients that just won't let us use stuff, and we understand the risk behind it, or, the what they're trying to avoid. But sometimes I feel like blanket sort of statements like we're not doing any of this, that, or the other thing tends to throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing, where we're throwing out all these potential, productivity enhancements when and probably spending more money, really, having people do workarounds or, use multiple platforms because they can't integrate or plug things in. And, from a legal perspective, I totally get it. You look at, I don't want this to overlap with that. And that makes a lot of sense when you look at it from an extremely high view. But when you get down to it and you go, okay, would you rather let someone use a better productivity thing and spend a little bit more time vetting that out and making sure it's safe? Or would you rather VE $30 million out of your building? Like, I think you'd rather put money into your building and figure out a way to make it, more efficient for people. And there's just not that sort of, the levers aren't as easy to pull back and forth, if that makes sense. It's a lot easier to say, okay, we're not doing any of that because we don't want that risk.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, and I'll sort of join the dots between two things you mentioned in last 20 minutes. AI or potential of AI agents and health and safety as an example or as a domain. So we are experimenting with something like that. So what we have done is everything you mentioned about customer hesitation is true, but we give them comfort that our AI agent will stay within their data model. So there's no data that lives in the internet. So no open AI stuff. And then ask permission to look at that needle in the haystack in the data that they already have.
Yep.
And we have customers that, let's say, take 500 safety-related photos on site a week. Over a number of years, they've built up tens of thousands of photos. And it is, very good opportunity for us, SureWorks, to train our model to find hazards within those photos, tag those hazards, and then a second AI kicks in that based on the hazard tagging. So each time we tag a hazard, it goes to a human, and then they say, yep, this is cool. So it trains the model through their permission. So that's unstructured data. But then the next step is, okay, well, we've got this 14 hazards tagged from, gravity to electrical hazard to whatever. Would you like us to log a ticket to somebody with a certain priority? So that way, people are just taking photos as they normally do, but then the AI agent is proactively working in the background to identify what could be like a sticky event, and that improves safety. So just an example, I suppose, of what you were saying, that if we have something that can work on unstructured data and provide insights, not just notifications, then that might help everyone go home safer, I suppose.
And that's a great example of a strategy, right, to make sure that it sort of stays within your own firewall, so to speak, on where the data goes, what models get trained, and things like that. I think that some folks go, well, isn't the advantage to be able to collect that information? Yeah, in some cases, but If you have those security concerns, then you're going to want to keep it within your own area, and you're going to be maybe, having to train it on your own data kind of thing. But you sort of have to pick, which way you want to go, I suppose.
Yep.
So, Josh, just before we started the podcast, you mentioned experimenting with AI in a vacuum a little bit. Is there anything that is exciting that you've seen so far through some of the experimentation, or something that's particularly of interest for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think our teams have been looking at, the value of AI. I mentioned my little, side project, and our internal teams have done some similar things and run with some specific ideas. And I think that, it's just sort of one of these things that we're not, broadcasting, everywhere kind of deal. But we've been, looking at different AI embedded, solutions for a little while. I used to talk about AI with, Structured Site back in XCon 2019, for example. We were talking about machine learning and AI, and we were kind of already saying, like, it's here, it's in your phone. There's things that are working back and forth.
I was probably there.
Yeah, you probably were.
Like, I'm pretty sure I was there.
Yeah, and so, it's. I think that it's just sort of interesting to see the perception, and there's some specific tools that folks are learning about that we're experimenting with, like trunk tools that we're looking at right now, where you can throw in your information, and they've got a very similar sort of, like, I don't know the exact term, but the firewall, the environment that keeps it within our own space and doesn't train or look outside. And so we're still dipping our toes in that kind of stuff. But it's really, there's a question of sort of like, well, do you develop some of this in house? Do you go outside? Who's sort of got the best way to do it, and sometimes you got to try something out, and see, like, is essentially proof of concept. Like, does this even make sense, right? Are people going to use it? And so we've done a few things like that. The one that I get to talk about the most is the Little League idea, because that was sort of just taking ChatGPT and trying to train it for what I could do with it, and see if it would help.
Right.
But there's lots of different things that I think one of the misconceptions is that AI is a product by itself. And I think that we're sort of thinking about it right now too much as its own product. But if you look at robotics, reality capture, and AI, you start thinking about what can those things do together. That's a whole different scenario. Right. So we're experimenting with some robotic solutions that kind of do that. They incorporate AI for navigation and things like that, where you don't have to do a whole lot of mission planning or anything like that. You kind of just tell it to go and capture the information that you want to capture, where you want to capture, or do whatever that robot is supposed to be doing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, but I think at some point we will shift and we'll get more comfortable with AI, and we'll get more comfortable thinking about it as, like Copilot. It's just on my computer now, kind of thing. And, I get this extra tool or this extra sort of mind, even though it's artificial, but I get a helper in some way. Like, and so I think we'll think of it as more like an add-on or a feature, or, maybe we'll even expect it. I think I said at RCN that I'm anticipating it getting boring at some point. Like, we'll just be looking at it. We'll be going, and what's interesting is that concept actually came from a meeting that I was on, where we were doing a remote session with a robot. And so we're on a call just like this, and we're watching a robot go around. And, in this case, it was capturing photos and scans. And, somebody pointed out, this is gloriously boring. Like, it's amazing. It's so awesome. But at the same time, it's very boring because there's no drama. it's working. Nothing's happening. And so I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and in this one where we kind of go, what was all the hype about? Because it does, it would make our jobs easier at that point.
Yeah, it's intuitive. I think maybe to maybe connect a few things here in my mind. So I'm thinking it's basically like a spice that's letting you unlock another level of flavor, if you will, for like a dish analogy or food analogy. But so we're getting to like this deeper level of capabilities, or this next horizon with like an AI accelerator, if you will. So it's almost becoming intuitive, right? So it's second nature. It's hopefully, just going to be something that is naturally helping us throughout our day, taking away some of the stuff that humans really shouldn't be doing, and is great for, an AI bot to handle. And ultimately will, fingers crossed, maybe one day even be able to say, we're like construction, AEC is the safest industry. Like, why not? And maybe achieve, new horizons for different sectors of the business and the industry overall. So exciting times.
I don't know where it came from, but I heard somebody at DPR say it, that success is not making the same mistake twice. And I think in construction, we make the same mistake over and over and over again. And I think that part of that is, generations of people coming in and out. And, we talk about, this skilled labor shortage. We also talk about people, with skills and knowledge and extensive experience in the industry, leaving the industry for whatever reason. And, I think some of these tools can help us, still retain those insights. And if we start combining that experience with the technology that we have in different ways, then we'll be able to leverage that and, stop making a lot of those same mistakes. And, for me, it was seeing things like, us getting started with a coordination process and, seeing building systems in the steel, it's like, why do we keep doing this kind of thing? We know we can't, do that. And that idea of, making the industry safer, making it more productive, making it easier on our people, and, being more consistent, but working with what we have, or, doing more with less is huge.
And so I go back to Nandan, your question earlier, like what is one of the underserved areas? In my mind, I was thinking, it's learning and training and knowledge capture. So, we have like tons of reality capture resources, but where's the knowledge capture resource? Because I started
organizational change management. I mean, it's a fancy term, but when you broke it down into component parts, the training, the identification of champions, the hand-holding, proving that this is actually good in medium to long term, and then making it consistent over different projects, business groups, and sites. That is where, even after identifying a solution, there is a lot of org change management that needs to go in, which is a very different but complementary skill set, I suppose.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to that problem-solving mindset that we talked about earlier, right? It's like, if somebody can figure out how to solve the problem, sometimes their identification or their value, feels like it's in solving that problem. And it's like, well, there's tons of different problems. That's why we have so many startups, is because there's so many different problems, and you can break down problems, to very small things, or, larger, complicated, processes and bottlenecks. But we sort of got to get past that like there's going to be other problems to solve, if we can get people past these first ones that we've already, encountered a couple times, then, we're going to be a lot better off, and we're going to be a lot closer to that idea of predictability.
Yeah, correct.
Definitely. So Josh, I guess wrapping up at least some of my thoughts, what do you think the construction worker of the future looks like?
Ooh, that's a good one. I've thought a bit about what the job side of the future would look like.
Yeah, we always ask that, the job site, but we never really ask
the worker.
The worker, yeah.
As well. I mean, if you go back a little bit, and then mentioned the iPads, that was they were released in 2010. So, I remember when I got to DPR in 2012, it was sort of like, what are we using these things? Do we, it was a question of, it was still, a few years later, it was still sort of like, is this a business tool? I think we're in that same, similar position with a lot of the tools that we're looking at that are emerging right now with robotics, AI, reality capture, a lot of these things. And so, I think reality capture is going to get a little bit more passive and automated. We're already seeing that, a lot of things headed in that direction, whether it's an automated capture or, smart helmets, different things like that are capturing information. Already seeing a trend, on larger projects that tend to initiate what to anticipate, if you will. We're seeing a lot of data be captured on those jobs. So I think that, as more jobs do more capture, smaller jobs are going to be, wanting to use that as well. So I think that, the construction worker of the future that used to, carry a hammer and now carries a battery-powered nail gun is probably going to have, some sort of robotic element to help them out. There's some really exciting stuff around that where, that enables, varying people with varying abilities to do different types of work. So I think that's a really exciting aspect of robotics. You don't have to be a big, strong man to, carry something if you can, tell the robot or control a robot to be able to do some of those things. So opens up the industry for a lot of different people. So, I'm hoping to see more diversification, more robotic elements. And, I think eventually we'll think of those things not as things that are going to replace the job, but as things that are enhancing it, just like we did with, power tools and, cordless tools and computers and a lot of those things that we sort of take for granted. So, I'd like to see us augment the environment a lot more and do more sort of spatial project management where we're, it's kind of the idea of the metaverse, if you will, but, not really in the way that it was presented to us originally, more in the sense of like, layering the pertinent information, getting the information out to people where they need it. And, that's typically the front line. So, I think we'll see more robotics, higher tech, better connectivity. We'll solve some of these problems and get beyond them for sure.
Get beyond it. Yeah. Beyond the problem. Love it.
On to new problems. There's always new ones to solve.
100%. Nandan, any last thoughts or things for Josh?
Lots of food for thought, especially from somebody who is in the innovation team. So we're, I think everyone would, it would be great to reflect on, I think half a dozen, if not 10 different topics we have discussed here. And just hearing Josh's thoughts in terms of how a large, contractor deals with challenges, distilling them into what should be focused on, finding a good solution fit, and then the org change management to make sure that the value is derived not as an island but across the board. There's a lot of ground we have covered. So it's been amazing from my perspective. Thank you, Josh.
All right, Josh.
This has been great. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share with us before we close out the session today?
No, just thank you for having me. This is a good discussion. It's a really exciting time to be in this space. And, can't wait to see what happens in our industry. I think we're positioned for some really good breakthroughs.
That was such an insightful conversation, Josh. Some of the key takeaways I found valuable were: first, harness the power of reality capture and BIM. At DPR, tools like laser scanners and smart helmets are driving more efficient and predictable projects. Second, AI is becoming a game changer. By acting as a co-pilot, it's helping teams process data faster and helping you make smarter decisions on the fly. Third, balancing innovation and consistency is key. While exploring cutting-edge tools, DPR ensures steady growth by leaning on proven best practices. And finally, robotics are reshaping the workforce. These tools are making construction more inclusive, empowering workers of all abilities to contribute in new ways. We are left with so much to think about, and I can't wait to see how these innovations transform the industry.
We appreciate your time, insights. Really great having you on.
Thank you.
For our listeners, we're excited to bring you to the leading edge of innovation in construction over the course of this show. We will be hosting leaders from the industry as they share their experience and insight. Finally, if you're interested in being a guest on the SureWorks podcast, don't be shy. Please send us an email at podcast@sureworks.io. That's podcast@sureworks.io to connect with us. Thanks again, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. I'm Erin Kahn, and this is the SureWorks podcast.